Good evening. This video might be a little bit of a long one. I will warn you straight up. I'm going to do a video in response to a question that somebody sent me privately. She is not at all unique with some of the questions that she asked, and I wanted to address them by video. That way, hopefully, it can be a help to multiple people who may have the same question or questions. The first one I'm going to tackle is going to be kind of spawning into a longer topic here. And I want to break into more than one video to tackle all of her questions. Mostly it all centers around modesty and how do you tackle that when you're new to the concept and you may not have the funds to be able to go out and pay a seamstress to sew you some beautifully modest dresses or anything like that straight up. So what do you do? How do you tackle all this? So several things to unpack here. First off, I recommend figuring out what is modesty. Now this person already had this question and she was already on top of that. What is modesty? I am going to put that part into a separate video as a longer response to that particular piece. But that said, I do think it's important that you figure out the answer to that first. That way you know what direction to go practical wise and what are you buying, what are you trying to sew. So now past that point, do you need to sew to be able to have modest dresses? I do not think so. Now there are some who would argue the point. I don't at all think that you have to absolutely be able to sew for most people in most situations. There are some exceptions to the rule. But in general, most women can come up with some store-bought stuff, whether it is brand new purchases or places like thrift stores. And I will cut to the proverbial chase and tell you the end result right now. My general advice is if you are new to the modesty concept, you don't feel like you have enough clothes or any clothes maybe that are modest and you want to get there, then, hi Joel, the cat just jumped up. I highly recommend, especially if money's low or tight, that you use a thrift store because frankly, almost every case it is going to be cheaper to do that than it is going to be to make it yourself. And that includes even for somebody like me who already has sewing machines, knows how to sew, and has fabric stash. So it just depends on what you're trying to do, your money situation, and if you're trying to do a very particular thing, which is kind of another point that I have here, if one of your points of modesty is because maybe you've joined an Amish or Mennonite church, well, if you joined an Amish one, you're probably not watching me right now. But if you joined a Mennonite church or something like that, then you may need a very specific type, like a plain dress with no print and a particular pattern, like a cape dress. In those cases, then yeah, you are going to have to be able to sew unless you go to a thrift store that happens to be located in a Amish or Mennonite area. I actually happen to live in Amish country in Northeast Ohio, so technically you sometimes can find those things in a thrift store. Now I will say, even here, it's not that often that I see that. You have to go really into the heart of Amish country to find that, and how many people have that available? Very few, right? So, and the dresses that you might find there are usually going to be more beat up too, because they've been used, worn, and they don't have as much life left in them typically. As a side note, sometimes you can find head coverings in these places too. But generally, if you want to have a very specific pattern and a very particular print or color or something like that, you're probably going to need to sew or pay someone else to do it for you. If you get really, really blessed, maybe you can find someone to do it free, but don't think that is very likely. It is very rare, and I will go into that here further down the road in this video. We're going to talk about some of the costs of sewing, because I think sometimes people don't realize what all really goes into it. But in general, most people can get their stuff at a thrift store or a Walmart or a Target or something like that. Don't discount the Walmarts and the Targets and things, because there was a couple years ago I found tons of plus-sized long, modest, I think they were called them maxi skirts at the time, and they were getting really easy to find and popular, and I'm like, I like this. It's nice when you can go in Walmart and you can find something. Now grant you, it's not every season and it depends on the changes in fashion and whatnot, but sometimes you can actually find some stuff like that, and if you get really blessed and find it on clearance, sometimes you can get a brand new piece for $2 or $3, which is, I mean, that's practically free in comparison to trying to make it. So don't discount that as an option. Always keep a little eye out, and maybe when you're shopping and getting groceries. Got another cat visitor here. Just keep your eye out, and you never know what deals that you may find. The plus size is an element I wanted to talk about, especially as it pertains to thrift stores. I myself, being a plus size person who shops at thrift stores fairly often, I know it's not easy. And in some thrift stores, they don't even organize by size, and that makes it so hard to find anything. But be diligent and be frequent about checking it. It will be a slower process. I don't make any illusions on that. It will be a slower process to find what you need. But eventually it will come. Unless you are in a size range, say above like a women's 32, because above that you're probably just about into custom. But anything between that 20 to 32, those are harder to find, but they're findable. Let's see. One of the pieces of advice I wanted to bring out tonight is blend the process. Don't discount that. For example, myself, I'm not married to a particular pattern, style, or type. Now, grant you, in the past I wore a lot of cape dresses. Sometimes I still wear in that zone. It depends on, you know, what my mood is, honestly, when I go to cut the dress out. A lot of times I'll do just a plain basic dress. Sometimes I might do a jumper. Sometimes I might do skirts. Sometimes I may do a store-bought t-shirt top and then attach a skirt to that. That's one of my favorite ways to make a dress because it's so comfortable on the top because I like the stretchy t-shirt knit. But then on the bottom, you know, you're just attaching a basic skirt. It's loose, it's comfortable, I like it. But it's blended. It's part store-bought, part homemade. Another thing you can do is just buy a t-shirt, don't attach it all, make a plain elastic waist skirt and just a straight elastic, no buttons, no darts, no nothing about it. Those types of skirts are among the easiest of the easiest to make. And if you are like me and have some unusual measurements, like I am extremely pear-shaped to a point that it's like so difficult to find the stuff that I need that fits me right if it's an all one-piece dress. I can go to a thrift store and find a skirt. I can find a top, but to find something that's a full piece dress that fits both my top properly and my bottom doesn't usually happen because my bottom is so much bigger than my shoulders. So I have to either sacrifice and accept something's going to be big in my shoulders. In fact, what I am wearing is a classic example of that. I have a jumper on that I like. I generally, admittedly, I wear it because it's comfy and it's blue. I like blue, but it's too big on my shoulders, and I actually kind of tucked the sides under a bit and tacked it down with a few stitches because of that. And it's because to fit the lower, that's what I need. Sometimes those custom fits are irritating to deal with. That is where sewing really comes in handy. If I'm making a dress that's full top and bottom, I can customize it so it fits my shoulders and my lower areas. But even with store-bought, you can do that by buying whatever size you need on top, whatever size you need on the bottom. And if you have a terrible time finding skirts that fit you, then a good solution may be making a plain, basic, elastic waist straight skirt and sewing that part that's hard to find, and then buying a t-shirt top. I will say it is much easier to sew a skirt than a top, because when you're doing a top you got sleeves and stuff like that to deal with. So it depends on what you're doing, but don't overlook the blended option. Sewing essentially has a lot of hurdles to it. Sometimes people automatically assume oh, if I could only sew, it would solve all of my problems. Totally understand you might think that, especially if you're not used to it or have no experience with it, the shopping for it, the time it takes to get things done, and so forth. Even as somebody who sews and I was very blessed. My mama taught me from a very young age, very, very little, playing at her feet, you know, wrapping Barbie dolls and trying to make my own little things, watching her sew, and she made a lot of my clothing. So I was exposed to it from a very early age. Even with that, I have hurdles. One, I don't always feel like investing the time that it takes to, you know, maybe make my own piece. For me, even for me, it's easier to run to the thrift store sometimes. The cost is definitely a hurdle. Now, it was not as bad when I was young. When I was young, it was generally cheaper for my mama to make me something than it was to go and buy it. Now that's not so much true. In fact, you're going to find most of the time it's more expensive, and sometimes significantly so, to make your own item custom made. Now, I'm not saying that you should discount that. Sometimes there's the good reasons to do it, and the skill is important. It's one that's being lost, and I strongly encourage people to learn it. So don't discount what I'm saying here is, you know, just to give up on sewing, because you never know when you might need that skill. For me, I'm blessed that I have it, but sometimes you don't really feel like dealing with it, or maybe you can't find what you want. You can't find the fabric, or maybe you're hard up for money and fabric isn't that cheap. Hobby Lobby, there not too long ago, they eliminated their coupons, so that hurts. If you want to get fabric, you're going to have to wait for the piece that you want to go and sell, or you're going to have to deal with it and go ahead and bite the bullet and buy it, or find something else at a different store. Joann's, I think, is still doing their coupons. I don't go there as much as I used to, but I think they're still doing them. It helps if you find a coupon, but even with a coupon, the prices are much higher than they used to be. I find they've gone way up. I know I probably need to reassess some of the costs of my head covering Etsy shop and stuff because of the fabric costs. I'm getting low on some of the pieces that I've had for a while, and I'm like, I need to go buy more. And I'm looking and I'm like, I'm having a hard time finding the fabric for some of those things, let alone noticing the price is a good bit higher. But the cost of your item is always going to matter. And if you're wanting to make a dress, I want to go over some more detailed costs. And I know this might get boring for y'all. That's why I went ahead and told you up front. The main solution is hit the thrift store. But if you want to stick around and learn a little bit about what goes into the garments and sewing them yourself and some of the cost, I think it's a good thing for people to realize if they're ever going to hire a seamstress or become one, or just plain get into it as a hobby, or whatever you do. It's really, really good to be aware of the costs, because I think sometimes people may run out and buy their first sewing machine not having any idea of the cost to make things. They're like, oh, I'm going to save all this money. You might not. Okay, now that said, there are some ways to save money, and that maybe we'll do that in a different video because I don't want to make this crazy long. So I made a list here for your basic things that you're going to need if you're going to make a skirt. And I mean the basic elastic waist skirt with not a lot of frills to it. You're going to need fabric, thread, and notions potentially. It depends on how many notions you have, but I put a very small budget in here just in case maybe there was something you don't have. And you might need, of course, you're going to need things like elastic and stuff like that too, so you can lump those however you want. But I put fabric, I put $15, and I put, that is basically about 2 yards. For me, I need 2 yards if I'm going to make a skirt. Some of y'all, if you're skinny folk, you might be able to do better than that, but in general, I know that's what I need for a long, modest skirt. I am also kind of figuring a rough average of about $7 a yard. That certainly you might be able to find cheaper. I'm using that because I have a particular fabric I like to use for my skirts, and I know that's about what it averages. You have to be careful to not use too light of a weight of fabric for a modest skirt. Heavier fabrics do tend to cost a little bit more. But fabric can be anywhere from $3–4 a yard to 20 plus. It can be quite high. Used to, you could find deals on stuff for more like $1 or $2 a yard, but I haven't seen those very much lately. Especially for a bottom weight, as they would call it, like a skirt. But anyway, for myself here, for this skirt, I put $15 in fabric, $3 in thread, assuming you don't already have it. It's not uncommon even for me to need to buy it, depending on the color. And then the notions, I just threw a little budget in of $4. That gives me $22. that's not counting the time. So say you're paying somebody to do this, we're just considering your own time. If you're a really fast seamstress, you might be able to cut that thing out within a half an hour and get things going to where you can start sewing. And I'm not counting time for getting things out and putting it away. If you're a good quick seamstress, you might be able to pull sewing that off in a half an hour. But I mean, you better be pretty experienced and quick about it too. I think most people are going to take 2 to 3 hours to do a skirt, especially if they're not particularly experienced at it. If you figure even just a low $10 an hour, you're looking at, and you factor in the supplies, you're looking at $32 to $52 for 2 to 3 hours of work, and just kind of a low wage right there. So that's a lot for a skirt. Just in my mind it is. I mean, I know certainly you can go to a department store and pay $100, $150, but to me $32 to $52 feels like a lot. Especially when I know I can walk to the thrift store, or not walk there, but none of that close, I wish. But when I can go into the thrift store and pay $3 to $5, you know, you can see how the thrift store is more attractive. And I don't have to take all that time, right? Now for a dress, it's even worse, significantly so, because your dress, you're going to need a lot more yardage. A dress for me is usually around the 4 yard marker, especially if I do a cape dress. Thread, I just put again $3 and I put again notions 4. That comes out to a cost of $35. Again, I'm doing 4 yards, $7 a yard. Not anything unusual at all. If anything, I'm probably estimating that low. You're going to have at least an hour in cutting a dress out because you've got quite a few pieces to cut and you need to do it precisely. Even if you're using a rotary and a mat, which does speed it up a little, you're still going to be an hour at least cutting that thing out. And then I think a solid 2 to 4 hours to sew. And that is with it being a relatively simple dress, and assuming you're not doing a bunch of extra add-ons and tons of darts and zippers and things like that. It depends on the closures that you do. Some people may even take more than that, especially if you're inexperienced or trying to be really slow, careful, and precise, which I strongly recommend. But if you're doing 2 to 4 hours plus that $35 in cost of items, then that dress, you're already up to $65 to $85 per dress. So we got $32 to $52 for a skirt and $65 to $85 for a dress. And the fluctuations basically depends on how long it takes you to do it. Obviously, if you raised your proverbial hourly rate, it would be a lot higher. There are some people who feel like the 10 is just no way that they would do that, and then other people, so they would be happy to earn that. So it depends on who you are, where you are, what you're used to, how you value your time. But just for the people who like to ask seamstresses, hey, will you make that for me? I'll buy you the fabric. You need to realize you're asking somebody for a lot of work. There's quite a bit of cost in that. And some particular items that are maybe a particular fussy item, like I've got some pretty low calculations here based on a plainer, simpler item. If you get a fussier item, you may have multiple days work, honestly. And to ask somebody to do that and just to expect it and blow it off like it's not a big thing, that's not the nicest thing to do. And I mention that not because anyone here has done that to me, nothing at all, but I know people do that to seamstresses sometimes. I know my mom's had people kind of do that with her, like, oh, you don't mind to make this for me, right? Yeah, I really don't have time to do that. So it depends on what you're doing, but realize a lot of times sewing projects take a lot more time than people realize. Sometimes they're like, oh, well, you do that for fun, it's your hobby. Well, there's still, a lot I have in my daily life I got to do, right? And I'll be honest, sometimes it's not fun sewing for others because compared to you sewing something for yourself, because the stakes are a lot higher. You don't want to make mistakes. They may complain about something that you do or anything like that. So you have to be a lot more careful. So keep those things in mind if you're going to hire a seamstress, and understand why her prices may be a lot higher than you expect. Her time is very valuable, and that has to be respected just like any other profession. Other things I wanted to bring out in this conversation. Unless you have a machine already, I would just say probably hitting the thrift store is your best bet. But if you do have a machine, I strongly recommend you learn. Now, if you are the dedicated sort that can pick up learning a new skill, and I encourage you to be, if you're the type of person that can do that and stick with it, then by all means buy you a sewing machine, because it will make the hobby so much more enjoyable. You can tackle getting that sewing machine in a lot of cheap ways. You can go buy a cheap basic one like at Walmart or Target, any of those basic stores. The best kinds of sewing machines usually are at dealers, but I don't think you need to start off there, especially if you need to see, are you going to stick with this? A basic base model is fine. You don't need lots of fancy stitches. Most of the time, very few seamstresses really fuss with those. I don't fuss with very many of mine, and I don't have a ton of them, but I have a very basic Bernina. Now, grant you, my machine is an expensive machine, but it was expensive to me, not to some other seamstresses, but it was only bought after I well knew I was sticking with this. I would have never bought this up front. I do like certain things about it, like it has the ability to do a one-step buttonhole. A lot of base machines will be 4-step, but that's okay. You can totally do those extra steps. Not a big deal. In general, I don't think it is worth it for a new seamstress or somebody wanting to learn to go out there and buy a fancy machine. A base one that is in the $80 to $100 range from Wally is fine. You can do a thrift store and maybe, get one at a yard sale, but I will say some of those old ones they can be solid workhorses if you have the patience to deal with little hang-ups that they'll have, or their quirks and personalities, because believe me, those things have personalities. Sometimes I think they have demons, but they have personalities. But they can be iron workhorses. They can be awesome, but they can also be much, much higher learning curve. In general, unless you're super patient to learn how to deal with that machine, I think you're probably better off to buy one of the simplistic, newer ones. Just my opinion. You can get really good deals on those old ones, though, and like I said, they will sew some things modern ones struggle with. So, but that's just a point. But keep in mind, all this talk about machines, I want to make something very clear, is you don't have to have one. People lived without machines for a long time, as we all well know, right? You can learn to sew by hand. Honestly, sometimes I just like to sew by hand. There's been some repairs I've been making lately, converting some old dresses that were beat up into some aprons, and some of that I've been doing by hand, just because sometimes it's pleasurable of an evening to maybe sit and listen to an audiobook and sew by hand. It's almost kind of like an ASMR effect, or so, I don't know. It's pleasurable to sit and sew by hand. I like it. Not everybody does, and I didn't used to, for that matter. It's just grown on me over the years. But you can certainly do that. You can certainly make an entire garment by hand if you have the tenacity to do so. Few people do in this day and age. We are a very impatient people. But you can if you want it badly enough. You can literally take an old sheet that maybe you already own that's in good condition, that still looks nice. You could make your own pattern, and you could whip that thing into some modest clothing and not hardly pay anything except for the needle and the thread, assuming you don't own that. So it just depends on the tenacity and patience that you have within you. Basically, your mileage may vary, but I do believe you can do it if you try. Now, I'm talking to y'all in general, not just the lady who asked me the questions. Her situation, I don't know how much she really wants to learn or not learn with the sewing. She asked about it. She realized, wow, to get to the seamstresses and stuff, it's going to be difficult, and it will absolutely be expensive. Very few women will sew for the proverbial song anymore. And I understand why, having had my own hands in it a lot, and I do the head coverings for Etsy. But honestly, there's times I think I really underprice them. And it's not because basically I'm always terrified to underdo or overdo it, so I go down toward the lower end of it. But in the same turn, for time value wise, I probably should charge more, and with the increase in supplies, yeah, I really ought to. But in time, perhaps I'll go ahead and raise that up. But understand that when a seamstress does have those prices, she's not trying to be mean, not at all. She's just valuing her time, just like we all do. But in general, if you want to get your clothing modest, sewing is an excellent way to do that. But if budget is a concern, and if you know yourself and you know, I am not going to stick with learning to sew, I don't have the patience, I'd just rather pay somebody to do that for me, or I don't even want that type of clothing. It just depends on you, your needs. Do you want a custom homemade dress? Is that something that you feel you need? Because there's other ways to be modest. It just depends on your standards that you and your family set. Do you need that? Do you have the tenacity to learn? Are you willing to pay someone else to do it for you? Various questions to ask yourself. But if money is an issue and time is an issue, every time go to the thrift store. It's just going to be cheaper. And honestly, it's probably going to cause you a lot less stress. And I would say especially this is true if you're trying to deal with clothing your children at the same time. Because as a mama, I'm pretty sure my children are eating Miracle-Gro or something, because I cannot keep up with their clothing. And if I was trying to sew every piece of it, I would probably pull my hair out. I don't know how my mama kept up with some of that. But she kept up with a lot. Now granted, she bought some pieces from the Kmart back then, but she sewed a lot of it, and that's a lot to keep up with growing, changing children. So I strongly recommend, in the case of children, doing everything you can to find modest pieces at the thrift. One more thing I want to mention in that regard is sometimes you can make pieces modest that you already have without spending so much as $1. And sometimes you can do that by simply layering. Maybe you have a top with a too low of a neckline, put a camisole or something under it. Putting a top underneath a shirt, like this jumper here that I'm wearing. Frankly, there's some people that would probably have worn it without even a shirt under it. I won't, but layering helps a lot. Like my daughter, if she wears a dress, a lot of times she'll wear about knee length or so, the ones that we find at the thrift, but she wears pants under them. And a lot of times those pants are kind of about mid-calf, and they're like the tight, stretchy things. But between the layers of the dress, hanging down low, and then the pants underneath, it all kind of comes together like pieces that may not necessarily look modest if they were by themselves. Together, the layers work and become more modest. So sometimes it's just using what you have in a different way. So I think I covered a lot. Looking at my notes here, I do think I want to really encourage you guys to try to learn to sew. It probably feels like through this whole video that I'm preaching, no, it's cheaper to just go to the thrift store and buy it. It is cheaper, but there is a big blessing in learning to sew. There's so much that you can do. You can make those custom pieces. You can make things to fit you that will not fit you from a store-bought piece, and that can be confidence boosting if you have a better fit. You may like the pieces more. You may like Modesty more if you have got a really good custom fit. And you may just enjoy making your own creations and own fabric things and so forth too. Personally, I love florals. I know they're old-fashioned and I know they're out of style, and I don't care, but I like them. They make me feel happy, especially when I see blue. In case you can't tell, how often do I have blue on, right? So I like blue florals especially, but florals just about anything. And it's nice to be able to go to the store and get some fabrics that are prints that make me happy. When I look at them, I smile, and the same with my husband. He looks at them and he smiles, and that's okay. And I can customize those, and that's all well and good. Other people may not want that. But if those are the sorts of things that you would like to do, please learn. It's a skill that you could learn and pass on to your children, which is awesome, right? The more people that learn it, the more generations that get to continue it, and the less dependent we are on having to buy it. I do think there is a point for that, you know, not being dependent on the store to deliver you all your clothing. But that said, there's that whole fast fashion argument and how people, particularly overseas, are worked to death sometimes for cheap clothes. And there is an argument to be made for, you know, making your own stuff and having a much greater value for it as well. So lots of stuff to unpack here, but definitely if you have it within you, the patience, tenacity, and just the desire, go out to YouTube, ask a friend, hey, are you willing to teach me? Because that same seamstress that may say, you know, I really don't have time to make the dress for you, but I'd be happy to teach you to sew as I can, or I may teach you to do this yourself, or walk you through it. A lot of them are happy to share the skill. They may not have the time and inclination to do every project for you, but they'll be happy to help you with it if you show the effort and you show the desire to learn. Many are happy to help you do that. And of course, sometimes people will just simply pay for lessons. That's not a bad thing. With YouTube, I strongly recommend going through sewing how-to videos. I myself have sewing how-to videos from a long time ago. Now, I'll grant you, I wouldn't really recommend a lot of them. They're not very good. I started doing a lot of those back when I was very new to YouTube and the camera was poor, and even now I don't know if I'd do a very good one. I do intend to redo a lot of the things that I have put out there before and do some new stuff on the sewing, but it's kind of one of those things I keep saying I'm going to get around to, and so far I haven't. But there are a lot of things out there already, so by all means, use the power of YouTube. You can learn so many skills. I know several people who have learned to do lots of skills from YouTube. I'm learning carpentry from YouTube right now. So the photography that I do, YouTube, I learned how to do it. I didn't even have any idea really what a DSLR camera was, or certainly not how to shoot on manual. Now I can do it with my eyes closed. And that is thanks to learning on YouTube. So by all means, if you want to learn to sew, go out there and start tackling it even before getting a machine or anything like that, and that'll kind of let you know, okay, how much can I invest in this over time. But in the meantime, run to the thrift store and I hope you have a good time shopping. Have a blessed day. I just wanted to add this onto the video. I always forget. Of course, I usually put it up at the very, very front, but if you're not subscribed to this channel, please go ahead and subscribe and like the video, leave comments. Those things do help my channel. My channel, it's been around a long time. It's got 2,000 subbies, but it's not a well-watched channel. I don't have a lot of watch hours or anything like that, so it needs a little bit of a boost. If y'all can give that, I'd appreciate it. I leave the links down below for the various forms of contact, my photography website, my Etsy store, which has head coverings for sale, and I've also been adding a lot of photography things. I've partnered with Printful to print items for me. So if you want prints of my photography or canvases or framed prints and various things, even t-shirts, I'm doing t-shirts because it's fun. But even that stuff, that's all linked down below, so feel free to check that out. Those things help support my family and are greatly appreciated. It's not why I'm out here on YouTube, but it's appreciated anytime you guys do that. Even little things like going into the Etsy store, like my mom went in today and like favorited a bunch of my items just to kind of help the Etsy algorithm. Like, thanks, Mom. Always gotta rely on Mom, right? So if you guys are willing to do any of that, I greatly appreciate it. I don't want anybody buying anything if they don't need it, but if you are looking, look down below. All in all, have a blessed one. Bye.